Amara's cries echoed through the narrow mud streets of her village in Kigoma as neighbors rushed her to the hospital. The pain was sharp, but deeper than the contractions was the fear building inside her chest. This was her first child, and she longed for her husband Jonas to stay by her side. At first, he held her hand, pacing nervously in the hospital corridor. But when the doctor whispered that there might be complications, everything changed. Jonas's mother, who had never fully accepted Amara, leaned in and told him coldly that he should think about his future. Moments later, while Amara was struggling on the hospital bed, Jonas walked away. He didn't look back. Hours later, Amara opened her eyes, drenched in sweat, her body weak from the battle of labor. She searched for Jonas, her heart pounding with hope that he'd be there, waiting, ready to comfort her. But the chair beside her was empty. The nurse's silence told her everything she didn't want to hear. Jonas had left, not just the hospital, but her. He had chosen to abandon her when she needed him most. The weight of it all crushed her. Tears blurred her vision as she realized she had been discarded like she was nothing. Her heart broke not just for herself, but for the life inside her womb that would be born into rejection. The loneliness in that room was unbearable, yet somewhere deep within, a fragile spark of strength refused to die. The night felt endless for Amara. Her body was weak, her heart heavier than it had ever been, yet she fought through each wave of pain with a quiet determination. She had no husband's hand to hold, no family waiting outside, only strangers in white coats moving around her. The nurse whispered words of encouragement, but deep down, Amara carried a fear that nearly crushed her. What if she lost everything in this room and left with nothing but her broken heart? Then, through the haze of sweat and tears, a tiny cry pierced the air. Amara's breath caught in her throat. The nurse lifted a small, wriggling baby into her arms. A boy. Amara could barely believe her eyes as she looked at his tiny fingers curling around her. Her heart swelled with love, overpowering the grief that had consumed her. Before she could even settle into the joy of that moment, another cry followed. A second child. A girl. The room shifted from silence to wonder as the nurses exchanged surprised smile. Twins. She had brought not one, but 2 lives into the world. Tears ran down Amara's cheeks, this time not from pain, but from something deeper. She looked at her son and daughter, so fragile, yet so perfect. In that instant, she felt something stronger than rejection, stronger than abandonment. She felt a vow rising in her chest, a promise that no matter how hard life became, these children would never feel unwanted. "You are my heart," she whispered to them, her voice trembling. "I will never let you go. You will never know the pain I felt." The nurses, who had seen countless mothers before, found themselves quietly moved. They saw the way Amara clutched her babies, not out of fear, but with fierce love. One leaned over and said softly, "You are stronger than you think." Another smiled, whispering, "They are lucky to have you." Amara pressed her lips gently against each of her twins' forehead. She named the boy Tay, meaning he has been seen, and the girl Tammy, meaning she has been completed. The names carried weight, a reminder that despite being abandoned, she had been blessed with a double portion of hope. The night that began in heartbreak ended with the sound of 2 tiny voices filling the wall. Alone, yes, but no longer empty. Amara knew her life would never be easy. She knew the whispers of the villagers would follow her, the stares of pity or scorn would burn. But as she sat there with her twins tucked into her arms, she felt a strength she never thought she had. She was no longer just a woman who had been left behind. She was a mother, and in her arms lay the reason to rise again. Amara left the hospital with her twins wrapped tightly in an old cloth. The road ahead was uncertain, but she had no choice except to walk it. She carried her babies close to her chest, feeling the warmth of their tiny bodies against her own, drawing strength from them even as her legs felt heavy. There was no family waiting for her, no husband to take her hand, no mother to guide her. She walked alone, yet inside her she whispered, "I will not fail you." Days turned into weeks, and Amara quickly realized that love alone could not fill her children's stomachs. She needed to find a way to survive. With the little money she had left, she bought a basket of mangoes and papayas and began selling fruits in Kabondo Market. Under the hot sun, she sat with her babies beside her, calling out to passers-by, hoping someone would buy. Some people pitied her, but many more laughed. "How will this useless girl raise twins on her own?" they mocked. "She cannot even feed herself." Their words cut deep, but she swallowed the pain and kept arranging her fruits neatly, praying for even a small sale. The market became her second home. She would rock one baby in her lap, while the other cried in the basket beside her. Sometimes she didn't sell enough to buy food, and those nights were the hardest. She would sit in the small mud hut she rented, holding both babies as they cried in hunger, her own stomach empty. Tears streamed down her face, but she would whisper, "Just sleep, my angels. Tomorrow will be better." Even when she had nothing, she gave them her warmth, her song, and her strength. Her neighbors were not kind. They sneered when they saw her walking with 2 babies tied to her back and chest. Some said she was cursed, that twins were too heavy a burden for a woman with no husband. Others shook their heads, telling her she would give up soon, that she would abandon the babies like Jonas had abandoned her. Amara heard every word, but she never let them see her break. She had been broken once before, in that hospital room, and she had promised herself she would never let it happen again. Still, life was unforgiving. Her hands grew rough from carrying baskets every day. Her back ached from carrying 2 growing children everywhere she went. Sometimes she wondered if Jonas ever thought of them, if he ever asked himself how his children were eating. But she refused to waste time on anger. Her only focus was survival. Amara's days were full of struggle, but each morning, when she saw her twins' faces, she found a reason to keep moving. Their little smiles reminded her that she wasn't just selling fruits. She was fighting for a future. Though the world mocked her, Amara's heart held a quiet fire. She was determined that one day, her children would know she had never once given up on them. When Amara was just beginning to find her rhythm in the market, word spread through the village that Jonas had returned. He didn't come back alone. Walking proudly beside him was another woman, dressed in bright new clothes, her head held high as if she had won some prize. Behind them trailed Jonas's mother, her face glowing with pride. She showed them off to everyone, telling neighbors, "This is my son's true wife. Look how happy he is now." The news reached Amara like a knife to the heart. She had long stopped expecting Jonas to return for her, but seeing him walk through the same paths, laughing with another woman, was a wound she hadn't prepared for. Worse still, people around her were quick to compare. "Look at Jonas," they said with mocking smiles. "He made the right choice. See how happy and clean his new family looks?" Meanwhile, Amara is sitting in the dirt with those crying twins. Laughter followed her wherever she went, not the laughter of joy, but of cruelty. In the market, when her fruits didn't sell, some women whispered loud enough for her to hear. She should have gone back to her parents. What kind of life is this? Carrying 2 babies, hungry, while Jonas enjoys peace with another wife. Others shook their heads, saying, "She is finished." A woman cannot rise when her husband has rejected her. Their words felt heavy, pressing on her chest like stones. Jonas, too, seemed to take pride in showing her how far she had fallen. He would pass by the market sometimes, his new wife holding his arm, both of them laughing loudly as if to prove a point. His mother made sure Amara saw their new clothes, their smiles, their comfort. She even called out once, saying, "My son made the right decision. He left trouble behind and found happiness." But what the villagers didn't realize was that not everyone agreed with their cruelty. Among the elders, a few saw something different. They noticed how Amara carried herself with quiet strength, how she never stopped working, how she endured shame with her head unbowed. One old man, watching her from a distance, murmured to his friend, "This girl has fire in her. They laugh now, but she will rise higher than all of them." Another whispered, "Life has tested her, but God gives the hardest battles to the strongest souls." Amara never heard these words directly, but sometimes she felt eyes on her, kind eyes that didn't judge, eyes that respected her struggle. And though the cruelty of the village hurt deeply, those hidden whispers of admiration were like a small flame in the dark. She tightened her grip on her twins whenever the mocking grew too loud. "One day," she promised silently, "you will not be the children of pity. You will be the children of strength. And they will see that the woman they laughed at was never broken." One hot afternoon, Amara sat in the market as usual, her twins beside her, their small hands playing with the peels of mangoes she had sliced to attract buyers. The day had been slow. The sun was high, and people passed her stall without stopping. Her basket of fruits looked as full as when she had arrived, and worry pressed heavily on her chest. She wondered how she would buy porridge for the twins that evening. Just as she was about to give up for the day, a tall woman in a flowing dress stopped in front of her stall. She wore gold earrings that caught the sunlight and carried herself with quiet authority. Everyone in the market recognized her at once, Madame Zuri, a wealthy woman known for owning several shops in town. Amara lowered her gaze, nervous, not knowing why someone like Zuri would bother to stop at her stall. Zuri didn't speak at first. Instead, her eyes lingered on the twins. They were thin but lively, their eyes wide with innocence. Amara quickly tried to cover them with a cloth, embarrassed by their ragged clothes. But Zuri gently asked, "Are these your children?" Amara nodded, her voice soft. "Yes, madam. My son Tay and my daughter Tammy." Zuri crouched down, smiled at the babies, then looked up at Amara with curiosity. "You sit here every day, don't you?" Amara hesitated, then told her story in broken bits. The husband who had left, the long days in the market, the nights with nothing but tears and lullaby. She didn't mean to open her heart, but something about Zuri's calm presence made her speak. When she finished, Zuri was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You are stronger than most people I know." Before leaving, Zuri added, I need someone to cook for a small family event this weekend. Can you cook? Amara blinked, unsure if she had heard correctly. Yes, madam. I can cook. That weekend, Amara prepared simple dishes: pulao, beans, fried fish, and chapati. She carried the pots nervously to Zuri's house, expecting criticism. But when the guests tasted her food, their faces lit up. Who cooked this? They asked. Zuri smiled proudly and pointed to Amara. The taste of her dishes spread like whispers through the town. Soon, Zuri asked her to cook again, this time for more guests. Word began to travel. People who once mocked her in the market now came quietly to ask if she could cook for weddings, birthdays, and church gatherings. Amara's hands, once busy only with fruits, now stirred pots and kneaded dough. The smell of her food carried hope into every corner of her life. She still struggled, yes, but something had changed. For the first time since the hospital, Amara felt doors opening. She looked at her twins and thought, this is only the beginning. Amara's small catering jobs slowly grew into something bigger than she had ever imagined. What began as cooking for Madame Zuri's gatherings turned into orders from neighbors, then weddings, church events, and even government meetings. Every time she cooked, people talked about her food. This woman's hands have magic, they would say. Soon, her name became known beyond her village. With the little savings she gathered, Amara rented a tiny space near the bus station in Kigoma. It was nothing more than a single room with 2 benches, a few old pots, and a charcoal stove. But when she opened the door and hung a simple sign that read Amara's kitchen, she felt a sense of pride she had never known before. It wasn't just a restaurant. It was proof that she had risen from the ashes of rejection. Every morning, she woke up before dawn, tied Tay and Tammy on her back, and walked to the restaurant to start the fire. The twins grew up surrounded by the smell of spices and the sound of cooking. They would sit in a corner, watching their mother serve steaming plates of rice, beans, and fish to bus drivers, traders, and hungry villagers. Sometimes Amara fed the poor for free. She remembered her own nights of hunger and promised that no one would leave her place empty-handed. As years passed, Tay and Tammy became her little helpers. They swept the floor, washed plates, and later, even helped stir pots. Customers adored them, calling them the little owners. The children saw with their own eyes how hard their mother worked, sweating by the fire, smiling even when she was exhausted, refusing to close the restaurant even on the hardest days. They grew up knowing sacrifice, but also dignity. Word of Amara's kitchen spread far and wide. Travelers passing through Kabondo carried stories of her food to other towns. Soon, she was invited to open a second restaurant in Kigoma, then another in Mwanza, and later in Dar es Salaam. What had once been a single-room eatery turned into a chain of restaurants across Tanzania. Each place carried the same warmth, the same promise. Food for both the rich and the poor, food that carried love. People who had once mocked her now stood in line to eat at her tables. Those who laughed at her twins now admired them, seeing how they walked proudly beside their mother. Amara never forgot the pain of being abandoned, but she also never forgot the strength that pain had forced her to find. Looking at her children, she often told them, "This is not just a business. This is our story. From hunger to plenty, from shame to honor. Remember, everything we have was built with faith, hard work, and..." Amara's kitchen was no longer just a restaurant. It had become a symbol of resilience, a story carried in every meal, proving that even the most broken beginnings can turn into an empire. Jonas returned to the village years later, but he was no longer the proud man who had once walked away from Amara. His clothes were worn out, his face carried lines of defeat, and the woman he had left Amara for was no longer by his side. She had abandoned him the same way he had once abandoned his wife. The man who once laughed loudly now walked with his head bowed, carrying nothing but regret and shame. He tried to blend into the market, hoping no one would notice how far he had fallen. But in small villages, nothing stays hidden. People recognized him immediately. Whispers filled the air. "Isn't that Jonas? The one who left Amara?" someone murmured. "Look at him now, broken alone." Laughter followed him, the same cruel laughter that had once been aimed at Amara. But this time, he was the target. As Jonas lifted his eyes, something caught his attention. A massive banner stretched across one of the busiest corners of the market. Bold letters read Amara's kitchen. His heart skipped a beat. He rubbed his eyes, thinking he was imagining it. But then he saw more. Posters on walls, delivery trucks with the same name, even bags carried by customers proudly stamped with Amara's kitchen. His legs trembled as realization sank in. The woman he had thrown away, the wife he had abandoned in her weakest moment, was now everywhere. Jonas walked closer, drawn by a force he could not resist. The restaurant was full, people lined up to be served. He saw young men in clean uniforms working with discipline, women moving gracefully with trays of steaming food. And then he saw her, Amara. She was no longer the fragile girl he had left behind in the hospital. She stood tall, her face calm but strong, giving instructions with confidence. By her side were two young adults, Tay and Tammy, her twins now grown, carrying themselves with the same quiet dignity. A sharp pain pierced Jonas's chest. He remembered the words of his mother, the moment he had chosen comfort over loyalty, the night he had turned his back on him. He had thought she would break, that without him she would collapse. But here she was, not just surviving, but thriving in a way he could never have imagined. Villagers who once mocked Amara now spoke in awe. "She is feeding the nation," they whispered. "The same woman he left in tears is now the reason so many families eat." Others shook their heads, saying, "This is what happens when you throw away a diamond, thinking it is a stone." Jonas felt the weight of every whisper, every stare. His heart burned with regret, but he could not escape the truth. He had lost everything, his wealth, his pride, his family. And standing before him was the greatest reminder of all. The woman he had abandoned had turned her pain into power, and her name now shone brighter than his ever had. The news spread like wildfire across the village and beyond. Amara had been invited to the capital city to receive a national award. The government wanted to honor her for creating jobs, feeding communities, and building one of the most trusted restaurant chains in the country. For many, it was unbelievable. This was the same woman they once mocked, the same young mother they had called useless, when she sold fruits in the market with two hungry babies by her side. Now, she was being celebrated by the nation. When the day arrived, the hall was packed. Officials filled the front seats, community leaders and business owners gathered, and ordinary people who had once eaten at Amara's kitchen came to watch. Cameras flashed, and banners with her restaurant's name decorated the stage. Amara walked in wearing a simple but elegant kitenge dress. She didn't need gold or diamonds. Her confidence was enough to shine brighter than anything else. At her side stood Tay and Tammy, no longer the small children she once rocked to sleep in hunger, but proud young adults who carried themselves with dignity. When her name was called, the audience rose to their feet, clapping as she walked slowly to the stage. The official handed her a golden plaque engraved with her name, for resilience, service, and excellence. Tears welled up in Amara's eyes as she turned to face the crowd. She took a deep breath, her twins standing close on either side, their hands holding her. In a steady voice, she began, "Many years ago, I stood in the same community where most of you come from. I was abandoned. I was laughed at. I was told I would never make it. Some even said my children were a curse." She paused, and the hall grew silent, the weight of her words sinking in. "But these same children you all laughed at, look at them now. They are my crown. They are the reason I fought, the reason I rose, and the reason I am standing here today." At that moment, the entire hall erupted. Some clapped. Others wiped tears from their eyes. Even the officials, often too serious to show emotion, stood applauding with respect. The applause carried a mixture of pride, shame, and admiration. Pride for her victory, shame for how she had once been treated, and admiration for her strength. Tay and Tammy looked at their mother with eyes full of love. They had lived her struggle, seen her wipe sweat from her brow, and heard her whispers in the dark promising them a better life. To them, this moment was more than an award. It was proof that their mother's sacrifices had not been in vain. As the cheers filled the room, Amara held the plaque to her chest and lifted her chin high. She had walked through rejection, hunger, and cruelty, yet here she stood, honored by the very society that once tried to bury her. And in that moment, she wasn't just Amara the abandoned woman. She was Amara the conqueror, Amara the mother, Amara the crown. After the ceremony, news of Amara's award spread to every corner of the country, and it wasn't long before it reached Jonas. He could no longer avoid the truth. His ex-wife, the woman he had thrown away like she was nothing, was now a national figure. Swallowed by shame and regret, he finally gathered the courage to approach her. One afternoon, as Amara stepped out of one of her restaurants, Jonas stood waiting by the entrance. His once proud face now looked tired, beaten by years of failure. His clothes were worn, his shoes dusty. For a moment, he couldn't even meet her eyes. "Amara," he whispered, his voice trembling, "please forgive me." Amara froze, her twins beside her, both now strong and confident young adults. For a brief second, memories flooded her. The night at the hospital, the empty chair, the cruel whispers, the years of struggle. She looked at Jonas, and in his brokenness, she saw the man who had once left her to die in despair. "I don't hate you, Jonas," she said calmly, her voice steady but firm. "But I cannot take you back. The door you closed years ago is one I will never open again." Her words were not angry, but final. Jonas lowered his head, tears spilling down his cheeks. He had expected anger, maybe even insults, but what cut him deeper was her calm refusal. Turning to her children, Amara spoke clearly so they could hear. "Strength is not about revenge. Strength is about rising when others want to see you fall. Never let bitterness guide your heart." Tay and Tammy nodded, understanding the lesson their mother had lived every day of her life. The villagers who once mocked her watched this moment in silence. Some whispered among themselves, "Look how far she has come. She does not need him anymore." Others said with admiration, "This mother turned rejection into power." For the first time, no one laughed at her. No one doubted her. Instead, they looked at her with respect, some even with shame for the cruelty they had once shown her. Jonas walked away slowly, his figure small and defeated against the bright banners of Amara's kitchen that decorated the streets. The same market where he had once paraded with his new wife was now filled with reminders of Amara's triumph. Amara, however, did not dwell on his sorrow. Her focus remained on her children and the empire she had built from nothing. She wanted Tay and Tammy to understand that dignity was worth more than revenge, that forgiveness was not weakness, and that true victory was living with peace. In the end, Amara's story became a living lesson for the entire village. She had been abandoned, mocked, and crushed, but she rose again, not to destroy but to build. Her greatest triumph was not her restaurants or her awards. It was the respect she had earned, the strength she had shown, and the legacy she was passing on to her children. The hall was filled with joy as students in bright gowns lined up to receive their certificate. Families clapped and cheered, proud of the children who had worked so hard. In the front row sat Amara, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her heart racing with emotion. On stage stood her twins, Tay and Tammy, both graduating at the very top of their class. As their names were called, the crowd erupted in applause. Amara's eyes filled with tears as she watched them walk across the stage with confident smiles. For a moment, she saw not the grown young adults standing tall, but the tiny babies she once cradled in the hospital, the same children who had cried in hunger by her side, the same children people had mocked as a curse. Now they stood as living proof of her promise, that they would never feel the sting of rejection she once felt. When the ceremony ended, Tay and Tammy ran straight to her, placing their certificates in her hand. "This is for you, Mama," they said. Amara hugged them tightly, unable to hold back her tears. The applause around her faded as she whispered to them, "You are my victory. You are my crown." The story of Amara was no longer just hers. It belonged to everyone who had ever been broken, laughed at, or abandoned. Her journey had turned pain into power, rejection into respect, and struggle into triumph. She was abandoned at the hospital, but returned not just with twins, but with victory, dignity, and a legacy that no one could erase.